Hello, I'm Antoinette James. Welcome to Behind the Beehive, where I look behind the political show and try and reveal the truth. And the truth today is that our impostor government, that is a private corporation on the shores of New Zealand, is laughing all the way to the door of the gulag as they usher us through, because we find ourselves in a default position. And that's what I want to look at today, just unpack today to get a bit of a feel. What does that mean? What do you mean default position? Often we don't realize where we are until it's sort of explained to us or it's pointed out to us. And it can be very dangerous if we're not aware of where we find ourselves at any given time. You know what they say, vigilance is the burden of the free, and we have not been vigilant at all for decades. We've just really enjoyed the peace and prosperity that we have had, and we are still living in, although it's fast disappearing, but compared to maybe European countries, our standard of living is still pretty good. And that's perhaps why many of us still haven't woken up today, because our little lives look still pretty sharp and shiny. There's still ways through for those that are determined. But having said that, many people are falling by the side, and surely it is our responsibility to make sure it's not just okay for me, you know, jack's aboard, pull up the anchor. Not good enough. We need to really be looking around us today and seeing those people that are in need. So yes, they're laughing all the way as they herd us to the gulag, and they know exactly that they have the upper hand. I'm talking about Comrade, the cabal down there in Wellington, the swamp dwellers with their snouts in the trough, living off the hard work of we the people. They know they've got the winning hand. They know that all they need to do is just hold on to the narrative, just roll out the little memos they're getting from offshore, I'm going to say every morning, whatever, to turn the thumb screws a little bit tighter on we the people. You know, many families are being destroyed now. Many families are struggling to connect just on ideologies, just on a kind of a pseudo-political level, because this government, Comrade, has so destroyed any vestige of unity that we once had. Even 18 months, 2 years ago, things are really falling apart. So what I'm wanting to talk about today is, why are we in this default position, and that we need to consciously recognize it and consciously decide to leave the position we find ourselves in. So just to unwrap that a little bit, just to unpackage that a bit, I just want to look at 3 different historical takes on default positions. And the first one is, I'm going to look at Christianity. What does the Bible say about default positions? So this isn't a Bible study this morning. It's a illustration that as I was thinking through this yesterday, I thought, okay, that's an illustration that we can see of what a default position is and how we need to choose if we want to get out of it. So this is from a biblical perspective, all right? I'm just looking at it straight, objectively, from just what the Bible says. So you can take it or leave it, but I'm just looking at quite objectively. And the Bible tells us that that all of us are born into a default position. The Bible says that default position is we're born in sin, that there is none righteous, no, not one, that we are separated from God. There's nothing we can do about it. We're all born into sin. So I'm not saying that you have to agree with that. I'm just using it as an illustration this morning so you can understand what I'm talking about. So that's what it says. So we were born into a position of sin. The Bible talks about it being the old man, as it were, that we're in that default position. We are slaves to a master, and that master, the Bible tells us, is the devil, Lucifer, Satan, whatever you might want to classify him at. So by default we are worldly, and by default we are egocentric, and we see that with little children, don't we? You know, they have a tantrum really easily. We don't need to train our children to have a tantrum. We don't have to train our children to be selfish. They are already there, and that's what the Bible's saying, that child is already by default in that position. So we as parents, we train our children to be more respecting of those around us and to honour other people and put other people forward. So this is what I'm talking about. We're born into that me situation inherently, and we need to learn to get ourselves out of that default position. So that default position means that we're rebellious, and you know, we see that often in the teenage years. We see that in the terrible twos. It means we're self-willed. We see that right across the board now. You know, in World War II, before World War II, children became youth, and then youth became adults. It was a flowing maturity pathway. After World War II, we got this new notion of teenagers, and the teenagers was a endpoint in itself, really. It wasn't, being a teenager, you weren't being channeled into adulthood. And today we have what we know as the Peter Pan generation, where they move into their teenage years and they just stay there. And we see the effects of that around us. The Peter Pan generation are usually those born in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So it's all about me, and I'm going to be forever youthful. I'm not going to step into anything of adulthood and take on responsibilities of marriage and children or whatever else. I'm just going to do my thing. So that is part of the default position that the Bible's talking about. We want to live independently rather than interdependently. You know, we need each other. So today we're all very selfish. It's all about me and what's going to suit me. And yes, Jack's aboard, pull up the anchor. I don't mind about the hundreds of thousands in New Zealand that are struggling, and particularly over this COVID scamdemic. You know, I'm okay. So it's all that sort of, that's the default position. The Bible talks of us as being slaves, come under the jurisdiction of the law, which is you are guilty. Okay, so it's that. But the Bible says that we can choose to leave that default position. And the Bible talks about that we can put off the old man, or we can put away our slavery. And by taking Jesus Christ in as our personal Saviour, knowing that he died for us in our place instead of us being killed for our sins, our selfishness, Christ took that on the cross, the Bible tells us, and he's given us a new position to stand in. Not the old one, a new position, not the default one, for us to choose. And that new standing is the jurisdiction of God. So we move from the jurisdiction of Satan and we come into the jurisdiction of God. And there the Bible talks about the freedoms that can be had, the grace of God that we can gain, his mercy that endures forever, and that we are pure and holy in the sight of God, because God can't look upon sin. So we needed Christ to enter into God's jurisdiction. So that's my first illustration this morning. Second illustration is, and I've talked about it a lot, is the 1,000-year dark ages that we were in under the tyranny of the papacy, where you had to have that narrative, or you were dead, you were put on the galleys to sail, to row your way out of this life through exhaustion, you were burnt at the stake, or whatever else might fact, befall you if you try to leave that narrative, that jurisdiction. Now, very similar today, I might just say, but that jurisdiction tended to be more what we would say as a religious jurisdiction. We had to, back then, for 1,000 years, believe what the Pope said. And if we didn't, and we didn't do all the little things that we were supposed to do, we were sent to prison. And there's a book, Fox's Book of Martyrs, that has been written. It was started in the 1500s by a guy called Fox. And it's a ghoulish read, really, of what happened to people that said, no, papacy, I'm not going to stand with you. And it wasn't just one type of person through, the 1,000 years that were murdered or tortured. It was all sorts of people as they tried to come out of that jurisdiction. It was Martin Luther, 500 years ago, through a movement of the people welling up under him. He was like the spearhead. They overthrew that jurisdiction, their default position, and through people and also the princes that were around Europe, particularly in Germany, in the Dominion of Germany, decided that they were going to leave the papacy as well. So they had a governing body, as it were, that said, actually, we're with the people. Now, Martin Luther couldn't have done it on his own as much as he tried, and we, the people that came under him, couldn't have done it on our own as much as we all tried back then, 500 years ago. But because there was a governing body of the princes that actually stood, or actually knelt before the Inquisition and said, you can take off our heads as well, because that's it. We're not carrying on with this silly game, this circus, this default position. No more are we going to do that. So because of that governing body of the princes changed their jurisdiction, they just stepped out. Martin Luther had that covering, as it were, and then the people were able to win the day. And that's what Fox's Book of Martyrs kind of goes into a little bit there as well. Maybe I'll just read this here. It was said of him, Fox, that he could never refuse help to anyone who asked it in the name of Christ. Tolerant and large-hearted, he exerted his influence with Queen Elizabeth I to confirm her intention to no longer keep up the cruel practice of being putting to death those who, opposing religious convictions, so that was the papacy, those that opposed the papacy, no longer should be put to death. The Queen held him in respect and referred to him as our Father Fox. Mr. Fox had joy in the fruits of his work while he was yet alive. It passed through the 4 large editions before his decease, so it just sold like hotcakes, and it's been added to obviously after his death. And it was ordered by the bishops to be placed in every cathedral church in England, where it was often found chained, as the Bible was in those days, to the lectern for the access of the people, because the papacy wouldn't allow the Bible in the common language of the people. And in England, clearly that was English. It had to be in Latin. So people were basically gagged. They weren't able to think for themselves. They weren't able to make choices. At length, having long served both church and the world by his ministry, this is Fox, by his pen and by the unsullied lustre of a benevolent, useful and holy life, he meekly resigned his soul to Christ on the 18th of April 1587, being then in his 70th year of his age. He was interned in the chancel of St. Giles, Cripplegate, of which parish he had been in the beginning of Elizabeth's reign for some time vicar. One guy of note here, we all know Pliny. I think he was a very early in the 1st century. Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger did a lot of writings. They were both of them were kind of scientists. One, I can never remember if it was Pliny the Elder or Pliny the Younger, that actually died on the beach by Vesuvius, because he went over to do a little bit of experimentation and check it all out. But what he didn't realize at that stage is Vesuvius was still spewing all the toxic gases from the center of the earth, and of course those gases were heavy and they all settled on the beach. So the poor guy was breathing in the carbon monoxide and other poisonous gases, couldn't get oxygen, actually just died on the beach there. He couldn't escape quickly enough, but he stood up. So here we go. This is the third persecution of anyone that dare go contrary, because you know pagan Rome hated the Christians as well before it became papal Rome. Same thing, it just changed its form. Same thing though. So in the third persecution, Pliny the Second, a man learned and famous, seeing the lamentable slaughter of Christians and moved therewith to pity, wrote to Trajan, certifying him that there were many thousands of them, that's the Christians, daily put to death, of which none did anything contrary to the Roman law worthy of persecution. The whole account they gave to their crime or error, whichever it is to be called, exactly today with Comrade, isn't it? We've got crimes, error, because we dare not to wear a mask, or we dare not to be vaccinated. Did she not say that any school whose unvaccinated teacher turns up must call the police and have that teacher arrested? Sounds just like pagan Rome, because it is pagan Rome. It's exactly what it is. They're coming back for us. Okay, I'll carry on with this. So what was Pliny saying? Amounted only to this. This is what Pliny saw then, that they were customed on a stated day, that means the Christians on a particular day met before daylight, and to repeat together a set form of prayer to Christ as a God, and to bind themselves by an obligation, not indeed to commit wickedness, but on the contrary, yeah, just like today, isn't it? The freedom movement here in New Zealand. We're not trying to be wicked, the contrary. Never to commit theft, robbery, or adultery, never to falsify their word, never to defraud any man, after which it was their custom to separate and reassemble to partake in common of a harmless meal, which would be, you know, the communion. Well, it would be a bit more than that, but that's basically what breaking bread together. So that was a little bit of recall of what was happening at the time under the pagan Rome I just read, but then later into papal Rome, as pagan Rome was destroyed, and then within the 1st century papal Rome hijacked Christianity and brought itself or brought Christianity, except for a few truthers, under Rome again, calling it papal Rome. But I'll leave that there for now. So Martin Luther and the princes started this new jurisdiction, and people flew into it. They couldn't get in fast enough because of the tyranny in the old papal jurisdiction. Now, Richard Dawkins, he is an atheist, and he is no friend of Christianity. In fact, he's quite an enemy. But he said this, I have mentioned this one before, in 2010, he said this: there is no Christian, that's Protestant Christian, as far as I know, blowing up buildings. I am not aware of any Christian suicide bombers. I am not aware of any major Christian denomination that believes the penalty for apostasy is death. That's Protestant Christianity, I must reaffirm there. I have mixed feelings about the decline of Christianity insofar as Christianity might be a bulwark against something worse. Well, indeed it is. And we've talked about it before, haven't we, that politics is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of religion. The West, the seat, the philosophical seat or the religious seat or whatever you want to call it, is Protestant Christianity, where the individual has preeminence. The individual has inalienable rights under God. In Islam and in Catholicism, no. The consensus, the group, has the authority over the individual. Protestant Christianity, it is the individual. And under Protestant Christianity, as the individual is blessed, much is given, much is expected. Of course, we're to look after those around us. So even Richard Dawkins realizes that this is not a good outcome for the people of the world. And that's what we've been looking at, particularly since World War II, the absolute destruction. And in We Are Revolting, I go into great lengths of the total destruction, the battering, the changes, and the control and the deception that has really been forced down the West's throat, particularly since World War II. Okay, so back in the day, people stepped out of the papal jurisdiction they were born into by default. No one had the choice of being anything else, or that was the end for you. And it was a fear that there was auto de fe. People were always in palpable fear. A wrong look could do them in. So that brings us to New Zealand. This is my third example, but I just wanted to lay a little bit of a pattern. And that's our pattern today, that we are born by default into the New Zealand government, which is a corporation, a foreign corporation on the shores of New Zealand, which is tyranny, which is an act of war. In 1840, with the Treaty of Waitangi, basically we were hijacked. And our from that point, there was a new jurisdiction, the one we're living in today, international law, the law of the sea, the law of SEE, the law of the sea, SEA, Papal Rome. That is our default position right now. Her Majesty, the Queen and Right of New Zealand, was a sneaky little number put on us, and what that did is it removed the flesh and blood monarchy of England out of the scenario, further sealing our fate as we are born into this default position here in New Zealand, this corrupt jurisdiction, this papal jurisdiction really. And that meant that all the authority was given to the New Zealand government. I say New Zealand government, they aren't our government. That's their title, that's their branding, that's their logo. But they're a governing, yeah, sure, but they're not our government. We haven't got a government. We've got a private corporation doing all the work. So, you know, I was watching the other day there. Often we're watching alternative news, and every now and then my husband will say, look, what are you wanting to watch something tonight? You know, maybe on the weekend when we just want to have time out, as it were. And so I said, hey, look, why don't we watch Pirates of the Caribbean? Now, the beginning of the Pirates of the Caribbean 3, it starts off with hangings. And there is a proclamation going out that all human rights have been suspended, all habeas corpus has been suspended, all rights of association have been suspended, all human rights have been suspended. And I said to my husband, is that Comrade? Am I listening to Comrade? Because that's exactly where we find ourselves today. total tyranny. So the big question is, how do we leave this default position we find ourselves in today? We're in this international jurisdiction and we are going down. We cannot win within its jurisdiction. It's taking us down. And one thing we can do, and I know many Māori have clicked onto this now and they are unrolling themselves from the Māori electoral roll, because when they enroll there, no one's told them, but when they enroll there, the corporation known as iwi then says, aha, I am the voice for these people that have enrolled. I don't need to talk to them. They've enrolled under iwi, the corporation iwi, and I can speak on behalf of them. So because iwi has been, it is a construct, and it has been corporatized, it can go into commercial law and contract law with our government that's also a corporation, because a corporation can only deal with another corporation. Corporation cannot deal with a flesh and blood person. If we're non-Māori, well, you know, we might need to be thinking about not even registering for these next votes, saying, well, I'm not going to enroll for the elections. Is it enough? And I'm suggesting no, it isn't enough, because we're still by default in their jurisdiction. Some people say, well, I'm sovereign, I'm standing in my sovereignty. Will that save us? No, because silence is consent and you're still standing in the swamp's jurisdiction. I am sure that the Uyghurs in China, believing they have a certain amount of inalienable rights under God, a certain amount of sovereignty, hasn't stopped the millions of them put into internment camps. Some people say, oh, but I've got common law and I can fight in the courts, and, you know, when I get my parking ticket, that's not me. Oh, that's my birth certificate. And I can stand as a representative for my birth certificate and just say, this all caps isn't me. You know, no, that's fine. If you want to turn common law into a weapon, weaponized common law, good luck to you. Good on you. I don't want to fight like that. Common law should be a place of being, a state of being, not a weaponized sword to fight the swamp jurisdiction, because when you're in the swamp jurisdiction, you will never win. You might get a few little victories. Remember the Pirates of the Caribbean suspending all rights? Well, Comrade's done that. She suspended our human rights, our Bill of Rights, under this COVID rubbish. She has suspended our human rights. She has suspended the Nuremberg Code. Well, where do you go? Where do you go with all that? Well, you go to the gulag, because they don't care. Their jurisdiction is geared for them to win. All the aces are theirs. All the legalities are theirs. The enforcement they own. They've weaponized the police. They've weaponized the army. We are on our own. So unlike Martin Luther, that had the princes that were that overarching national jurisdiction change, if we stand on our own in our hapu, in our manner, in our sovereignty, on common law, whatever, it's all false hope. You just can't get anywhere with it. I heard someone say the other day there, oh, we need to start our own Nuremberg trials here in New Zealand. Well, the New Zealand corrupt government have told us that our medical health acts and legislations doesn't recognise the Nuremberg Code. Fancy that. That shows you what tyranny we've got reigning in this country now. Someone bandied around a video saying, oh, we'll arrest everyone. We can just go and arrest the whole political swamp. We can arrest the council. Okay. Whoa. Okay. How many people do you think you're going to need to rally to do that? Everyone's saying, hey, this is a grand idea. But that's where it is. It's just parked in the fairy basket. It's not going to happen, people, because once we do that in one area, we're then going to be, oh, those are those terrorists. Remember Ardern's getting those legislations in place? There they are. They've already started. We, as it stands now, are basically in the big boys' sandpit. We're in the big boys' jurisdiction. The big boy, and they've got all the rules in that sandpit. And we're there trying to do our little thing and now make our little castles quietly. They can come along and kick it. They can kick the sand in our face. This is the big boys' sandpit. And they call the tune. And they, because we're sitting in their little piece of sand, they will tell us exactly what we need to do, what we can play with, sideline us, kick sand in our face, and ignore us. And that's exactly what's happening. So if we are wanting some sort of hope, where will it be? Now we've got He Wakaputanga, so that's very exciting. Oh, put your flag up, that's cool. I've got my flag up, I've got my trespass notice up. Say I'm standing lawfully in that jurisdiction. But what does that do for me? Just like Martin Luther, just like the people of that day, diddly squat. Is there hope? And I'm going to suggest there is. And that is found in a national body under He Wakaputanga jurisdiction. You can step out of the swamp jurisdiction that you're in by default, and you can stand in a new jurisdiction of freedom and self-determination. Is it as easy as that? Well, yes, it is. Will it work? It is a numbers game. I can't say that it isn't. It would be silly for me to say that it will work just like that. And just like they had in America a year or so ago among the Democrats that were leaving the party in the droves, hashtag walk away, we should create that in New Zealand. As you know, I anchor myself in the King James Bible. There's two scriptures I want to finish with, and one was one I read yesterday, Psalm 13 verses 7 to 9. And I kind of thought this was a word for Māori. And this, I love this. Now you listen to this. It says, He, this is God, raises up the poor out of the dust. Now we've had 180 years of the swamp jurisdiction near destroying Māori in New Zealand. Except for the few bought ones. And it goes on, and lifteth the needy out of the dunghill. Now, we're all going down, people, but I just really felt this was a word for Māori. That he may set him with princes, so that he, God, may set Māori with princes. So what's that? Sounds like a governing, overarching, governing body to me, just like the princes of Europe 500 years ago, so that he may set him, Māori, with princes, even with the princes of his people. Well, today I was reading Psalm 114, believe it or not, and I found this was really a word for us all as New Zealanders. And it's verses 1 to 8, and it says this: When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language. Oh, that could be legalese, couldn't it? Judah was his sanctuary, and Israel his dominion. The sea saw it and fled. That's international law, the law of the sea, S-E-E, papacy law, because it's all about us on our ships, as you probably know. Jordan was driven back. That's more waters, because it's all about water with international law. Then it says, the mountains skipped like rams and the little hills like lambs. What ailed thee, O thou sea, that thou fleddest? Thou Jordan, that thou was driven back? Ye mountains, that ye skipped like rams, and ye little hills like lambs. Tremble, thou earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, which turned the rock into standing water and the flint into fountain of waters. I thought this was very exciting because Egypt, getting back to biblical language, Egypt is a biblical type for the old man, the old jurisdiction, for comrades law, the law of the sea, SEE, papacy law, the law of the sea, SEA, international law. It's the, you know, Pharaoh had the flail and the crook. We were herded and we were battered. Egypt talks about ancient mystery religion, Luciferianism. Egypt, scripturally in the Bible, talks about bondage and slavery. That's the old man. It talks about total control over people because the Israelites were in slavery in Egypt for, I think it was 400 years. Egypt talks about a stripping of all assets, of no human rights, no inalienable rights under God, zero, zilch, diddly squat. Egypt talks about the swamp jurisdiction, what we are in by default. Now the mountains and the hills, that talks about freedom, it talks about renewal, prosperity, fatness of life, self-determination, and generally blessed. I believe He Wakaputanga is God-given opportunity back in 1835 with the United tribal flag or tribes flag, which is clearly Christian. The rangatira of the time and many Māori at the time were Christian. It sits on customary law and it sits on the inalienable laws of God. I think that we have had this jurisdiction waiting for us, if we want to step into. So I'm going to leave it there for you today. I know there's a lot to think about. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. Bless you now.